Hello and welcome back to today's video. Now we'll be getting into something a little different. As we previously covered, we've re-imaged our Windows system, we've installed Windows 11, we've used WPD, we've played a little bit with Windows Server, but we haven't fully delved into it. Now what we'll be doing today is diving and getting started into Active Directory. Now I know Microsoft is currently trying to move Active Directory to all the Azure services, no on-premise bullshit, whatever, which perfectly fine. I do plan on covering Azure at a later point, but I still think it's important for the on-premise servers that are currently running in our environment every day. You should learn how to use them, how to configure them, how to get them set up and secured. And today we'll be getting just started into the surface level of Active Directory, essentially getting Active Directory set up, configured, setting up DNS, and then we're going to add in our first couple of clients. From there, we'll move on from maybe local group policy, maybe we'll configure IIS, depending on how things go. We'll move on from there and dive deeper into it. Now, as you guys currently can see off my screen, I am currently in our FortiGate. I've actually configured a different VLAN altogether for these VMs, given that with Active Directory, DHCP, all sorts of services that Windows Server offers, we're going to need a separate network entirely for it. So in any environment you may be using this in, I would recommend putting your Windows systems and all that in general on a separate VLAN, however you see fit. For this situation we are, because one, I don't want it really touching a lot of other systems, especially when it's more of a sandbox than a pre-product or a full production system, excuse me. As well as there's really no reason not to, especially if it can interfere. If we're having Windows Server connected as an Active Directory, it's going to need to be a DNS server, which is also going to mean that it's going to reconfigure everything else on the network, since I use Technetium for my DNS system. So everything out of the way, we'll get started. As you see here, we don't have anything else configured. It's just a basic VLAN right now. I'm going to keep this open because we're going to need it later. Now diving into Windows Server here, as you can see, we have Server 2022 ready and available. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to dive in and start up the Active Directory service. So first, if we go under Manage, Add Roles and Features, we'll go Next. And you know what? We should just do this in full screen. There's no reason not to. Role-based or feature-based installation. And select our server. Make sure we select Active Directory Domain Services. And then next, yep, and install. Now what this will do is it'll install Active Directory and the required services onto your Windows Server 2022 or 2016 installation, depending on which one you do. Active Directory is available with majority of Windows Server editions. Going back to 2008, 2003, things like that. I'm not sure when they started doing Active Directory, but it's a pretty old feature that's been innovated over the years. So this will take you a couple of minutes depending on your drive and service speed. I'm running this on R810 on a virtualized system, so it's going to take me a little bit longer. But once this is finished, we will come back to it and then reconfigure the rest. Okay, Windows Active Directory has installed, so I'll go ahead, close this, and then under ADDS, there it is, configuration required for our server. We'll go More and promote the server to a domain controller. Now what this is going to do is in a master slave client server, however you want to say environment, this is going to be your controller, the central point of how Active Directory works. With Active Directory, you can span this across multiple different servers and multiple different environments, especially say you're a multi-site configuration. Maybe you want to cache certain logins on each site. Like for example, in our district where I grew up in, we had Windows systems for our computers in the school. Every school had Windows 7 computers. And then from there was, I want to say 3 or 4 Active Directory servers. Don't ask me how I know this. It went very poorly. And from there, you could then cache the results. Each, student, teacher, whatever could log on. And the one account basically was available to all computers as long as you had the username and password. Basically, what Active Directory is meant for, on top of obviously your local group policy editor and other authentication policies. So we'll go ahead, we'll add a new forest here. and we're going to specify a root domain name. This should be something like your company root URL, like dwxenterprises.net, nerdherd.wtf, whatever it may be. For this example, since this is a testing environment, we're actually going to do nerdherd.internal. It is important to note here that this .internal TLD is only available within the LAN, so don't expect to be able to use this globally across the internet, essentially. You shouldn't be exposing Active Directory to the internet, but that's besides the point. We'll go ahead and hit next. Give it a minute to think because it's Windows. And I really need to update the CPUs on these servers, but I don't have the money to. Oh boy. Okay, looking at this here, both these settings are currently set to Windows Server 2016. And this is actually a very important and good to know thing. With your forest and domain functional level, your forest is the base of the pyramid or the core of your Active Directory. So in order for your entire cluster, your entire Active Directory system to support anything older than 2016 or something like Windows 10, you'll need to turn your forest functional level down, like back to 2008, where then your domain functional level will also be accessible to 2008. Similar to, we set it to 2012. Oh, no, go back. From here, now we can't set anything past the 2012 mark. Once you've configured this to your needed settings for our environment, we are just going to set everything to Windows 10 and 11, since Windows 7 is phased out securely, or for security reasons, I should put it. We'll set everything to 2016 for our environment, and then we're going to configure a very secure directory services restore mode password. This should be a very secure password if you do have to perform any sort of diagnostics on your Active Directory server or cluster. For this, we're going to choose the very secure password. I highly recommend you don't do this for your own domain. Even if it is testing and you're exposing things, you don't keep it secure, to the best of your abilities. If it's a production environment, do more than the best of your abilities. Oh, no, you're not going to let me. Password 1. Okay, no, it's going to make us. Okay. There you go. Okay. And it is going to be mad that we don't have DNS delegation options. We can just leave that alone. We'll take care of that here in a second. And then next will be your NetBIOS domain name. Wow, I can't speak. Your NetBIOS domain name will be used for accessing resources within Active Directory, whether these are file shares or these are logging onto the system. Like, for example, if you grew up with a school district that had Windows systems, you most likely logged on to like district name / username. That district name was designated by the NetBIOS domain name. So whatever you can set here will be how you sign on. For example, we'll do nerd internal, and then from here, all of our users will use this to sign on to the domain. So we'll go ahead and hit next. Keep all these the same unless you see fit otherwise. Make sure you review all your selections. Everything looks correct to you. We'll go ahead and hit next. It's probably going to pop up a few warnings because it's a brand new server and yada yada, but there should be no failures. If you are seeing any fatal errors when the prerequisites check is being performed and completed, you may need to go back, especially if you have Active Directory certificate services installed. Domain services is not compatible with that, and you'll have to roll back that change or go back to a previous snapshot of your server if you're virtualizing this, for example. I'll admit I've had to roll back a few times because I remember these being different instructions from when I grew up on it. Back in the day, I used to screw around with Windows Server 2012 on a small desktop in my own LAN because I didn't have internet with that computer. And yeah, that I remember running Active Directory domain, IIS. I'd download Flash games, put them on browser things. Yeah, it was fun, and that's part of the reason I know quite a bit on it now. But regardless, as you can see here, we've got the prerequisites check. There's some warnings about security, yada yada, because we haven't really configured much yet. That's fine. We can just go ahead and install it. This will take a minute here, so we're gonna once again go ahead, let us complete its process, and we'll come right back to it. Okay, an Active Directory domain was finished installing, so it's gonna have your system reboot. It'll take once again a few minutes, just let it do its thing, and then sign back in. You should be good to go. Okay, now our system is back online. If we do Control-Alt-Delete, go back to full screen. First thing you can see here is we were renamed from our admin account to Nerd Internal, excuse me, /administrator. So it'll be your same password as usual, which I think I remember my password. Oh, no, I'm not typing. There we go. Let me see if I remember yep, I do. Okay. So that's going to be your first thing you'll notice. The second thing is going back to your server administration settings. You'll see that your functions are available to you to manage your Active Directory network. So if we let this load here real quick. Okay. Now we're online. And as you can see, we have our Active Directory domain and then the DNS that was installed alongside it. We'll go take a look here real quick into DNS Manager. You'll see in our settings, we have some new forward lookup zones. The Microsoft Domain Controller Services, and then the nerdherd.internal. Now, this is where you're going to need to make changes to the current network over DHCP or however you have it configured. I'll show you guys here. If we go back into our FortiGate, first off, note your subnet range, and then you'll want to go network. Come on. Go take a note of your current IP address, which... Okay, we're missing... Oh, no, we're not. Okay. 1042.69.2. So, if we go in here, DNS server, specify 10.42.69.2.
Nice.
And this from here will then, all Active Directory services for links linking to essentially other computers to your Active Directory can now know where to designate and where to send those commands. From there, anything that's, google.com and all that will then be forwarded up from the server. So I'll show you guys if we hit OK. And coming back to this after you've made those changes to your domain name settings within DHCP, if we close out of here, close out of this, and then we go back to our Active Directory Domain Services or ADDS, pull this up full screen, we'll go ahead and go to Users and Computers. In order to join our first computer to the domain, it needs to be listed within the Active Directory tree. So if we go to our nerdherd.internal tree right here, under Computers, we can right-click and then do New Computer. And then from here, we'll need to go grab the computer name, which if we unfull screen out of here, go in here, full screen. And if we go into our Windows 11 client, open up Settings, and under System, you can see our, our host name. There it is. Our host name, our computer name right here. All in caps, desktop-829v4ir. Now, this name doesn't need to be anything in particular, but you do need to make note of this joining in your client system. So we'll go ahead, if we unfull screen out of here, take note, desktop-829v4ir, go back, and once again, desktop 829v4ir, and then hit OK. From here, the computer is now listed, and we'll go back on full screen and prepare it to join the domain. In the same menu, if you scroll down in the client, go to About, you can go to the related links under domain or root group, go join network, go network ID. This computer is part of a business network. My company uses a network with a domain. And then next, from here, you're going to add in your administrator username, since this needs write permissions, and it is currently exempt from the protections that reusing a potential account or computer account per se needs. There was some hardening restrictions added in a Windows update that may result in errors such as this user does not have the proper write permissions. Due to security reasons, you cannot add this because you're reusing the account, things like that. So we'll do our administrator account and our password. I think I typed that wrong. Come on. And then finally our domain name, which we used earlier. Nerd internal. Wow, I can't keep track of things. And we'll go next. Oh, caps is not, is it? Okay. Administrator. Yep. Let's try and log in. Okay, there it is. So an account for this computer has been found in a domain. Would you like to use this? And yes. Next up, would you want to enable a domain user account on this computer? And from here, you can choose to use your administrator user, or if we go back into our domain server, we'll go ahead and just add a user for ourselves in that system. We'll go under users, new, user, full screen this here. And then the first name, yeehaw, it's a user, don't want to add that one. Okay. So we'll want to keep note of this. Once again, yeehaw, it's a user. Make a password for it. And then uncheck, change password at next logon just for now. Go ahead, finish it up. And if we unfull screen here and we go back, in our client, we'll use that same user. And then next, we'll make it a standard account. And then finally, we're going to need to restart to apply all these changes. So we'll hit finish. Okay. And restart now. Yep. We're just doing some stuff in the background. We don't need to worry about that. We'll go ahead and restart that client. Okay. The client boots back up. And if we open the screen here, we have nerd internal. Yeehaw, it's a user. And if we use our domain password, we'll sign in. You'll probably have to create the proper files and folders for a new user. And now we've successfully joined this system to a domain. I'll go ahead, I'll pull up the settings and just prove it to you guys. But this is the basics of setting up the Active Directory server and adding your computers. Now, next up would be our local group policy to enforce certain password security policies, password lockouts, make sure that we have a one-way encryption policy, things like that to enhance the security of our Active Directory domain services. We'll go ahead and cover that in a future video, but for now, since we are already, I believe, almost at 15 minutes, I probably have about 20-25 minutes, a little bit of me screwing up here. I'll call it now, and we'll go ahead and cover this in the next video. That way I'm not boring you guys out. So if you have any questions, concerns, if you are running into any issues, please leave them down below. I'll go ahead and cut parts of this video for the last chunk, kind of showing you guys what errors you may encounter, especially if you use like a standard user I talked about earlier, and how to get around those. So tally-ho, if you have any questions, concerns, like I said, leave them in the comments down below. Go ahead, check out the link tree as well, and donations are always appreciated, but not required. So thank you guys for watching, and have a wonderful Christmas and a wonderful New Year. Thank you. Alright, and as I previously talked about before, you may run into certain issues when it comes to adding your client to the domain. One of these issues we'll take a look at here real quick. So if we go into network ID, like we're changing the domain over on this new client computer, we'll do next. We'll just do owner A, that's not going to matter, and then some bullshit domain. And once again, some bullshit domain. Okay, now let's walk through what just happened. First off, we got an error, a soft error, I would say, when we originally tried to join the domain. Windows indicated that it cannot find an account for the computer in the some bullshit domain. And what this indicates is that Google tried to look, or not Google, Windows tried to look up where, if there was a valid account basically for that computer. Additionally, it was not able to do so because we don't actually have a controller available for the some bullshit domain. So what we're going to do, or after clicking next, what happened as well is that it tried to contact the AD server and it told you, hey, we can't find one, what's going on? The first important thing to note is to make sure your domain name settings are correct. If we go into the VLAN settings right here, you can see we have our subnet and everything configured, but our domain name is incorrect. We can additionally verify that by doing an NS lookup, which is the equivalent of dig in like dig in Linux. What this does is you can give it a domain and it'll try and look up the IP address. So google.com, for example, it gives you that. And we got those results from Quad 9 because that's our currently configured domain server. If we go NS lookup nerdherd.internal, like we did earlier, how we configured it in the Active Directory server, it'll tell you it's a non-existent domain, especially since it's using .internal domain name, our top-level domain, which means it shouldn't even be existing in Quad9 in the first place. So if we go into the FortiGate, we'll make sure that we can get this updated to 10.42.69.2, like we set before. Hit OK and apply those changes. And then after that, you'll want to make sure, if we clear the terminal, we do an IP config release ipconfig flush DNS to make sure we're not caching any of those results before. And then additionally, ipconfig renew. Should renew here shortly. And then just like that, if we try and do that domain name lookup again to nerdherd.internal, we actually return results. And then from there, we can then correct, obviously make sure it's a valid domain in the computer domain, but then we can go back, we can join our computer to the domain with the proper permissions and users, and then move on from there.
Nice.